Hi guys, I'll be taking you through this Ruby on Rails tutorial series, and the first thing that we're going to cover in this series is just to actually get you set up and ready on your system so that you can actually develop, and then you can follow the rest of the tutorial series. So the first thing we need to do is basically go through the steps of installing the software on your system. And whilst I use a Linux based system, there are other guides on how to do this on Windows and Mac, and they're not necessarily all that different from each other. So you should be able to learn enough from me doing this on screen for you to then translate that to whatever operating system you're attempting to do this on. Although, to be fair, I would advise you to try and develop on the kind of systems that you're actually going to deploy your software, and then you tend to avoid a lot of mistakes and errors that you get from swapping over operating systems, and hence that's why I use Linux. So the first step that we've got is we need to install a piece of software called the Ruby Version Manager. Now what that does for us is it allows us to then pick and choose which versions of Ruby that we can actually run on our systems. The reason for that is that we want to use Ruby 2.0.0, and on my box, on my Linux system, the default version of Ruby that comes installed on here is at best 1.9, and that's not a good enough version for us to use the most current version of Rails. So we want to be able to update our Ruby version, and at the same time also put in a compatible version of Rails, which is fairly recent and new. So to do that, we need to install this Ruby Version Manager, which allows us to do so. So the first thing we need to do is we need to install a few pieces of software that will help us to actually install all of this stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the following command: sudo apt-get install lib gdm or gbdm -dev lib ncurses5 -dev automake libtool bison lib ffi-dev and curl. Now you might not know what these are. It doesn't really matter if you do or not. All that we really need to do is install this software so that when we download the install script for the RVM, or the Ruby Version Manager, then it knows how to deal with it and install it properly. So basically we're going to just install this software. Don't necessarily need to know what it is. As you can see there, it's already installed on my system, but you should then see a little list of processes happening and some downloads finally completing with the success messages that just say it's all been installed successfully, and then you can go ahead with the next step. Now the next step is to use this final piece of software that we installed here, curl, to actually download the install script for RVM. So to install it, we're going to do this command here. So we're going to use curl with the minus uppercase L key, and we're going to download from this URL here, and then pipe everything through to bash with the following switches. Now you don't necessarily need to know what these are either. It's just literally just us getting the software installed, and this is a very generic way to do that for everyone. So once you've typed that in, we go away and watch the process as it happens, and as you can see, it's all gone down nicely. Now right at the bottom here, it says to start using RVM, the Ruby Version Manager, you need to run source, and then it'll give you a path. Now this part of the path should be different. It'll probably be more what the folder structure on your system is like. But basically the next step is just to actually copy that and then paste it again into here, and that makes it so that the RVM is actually available to us. Now the next step is to actually start and use RVM to get the correct version of Ruby onto our system. So to use RVM, we type RVM install 2.0.0. Okay, so from that you can see that it says, if I highlight that, already installed Ruby 2.0 on my machine. So what it should do is, on your machine, it should then go away, download it, confirm that it's installed. Once it's downloaded and installed it, we want to make sure that instead of using the default version of Ruby that may be on your machine, if you've already got one installed, is changed to this 2.0 version that we want to use. So to do that, we say RVM use 2.0.0 hyphen default. And that sets our default version of Ruby on this system. So now if we type in Ruby -v or Ruby -v for version, we should then see that our default version is now set. So that's our Ruby setup, exactly the way we need to do it. The next thing we need to do is we need to install a piece of software called Node.js. Now, Node.js is a way of interpreting JavaScript through a program or an executable on this system, and it's used by Rails to do a lot of the interpretation through the asset management. All very complicated. Right at this stage, you don't really need to understand that. All you need to do is install the software that supports it, and then later, when it comes time to actually make sense of all of that, it will make sense. But right now, we don't need to even really understand why it does that. We just need to install the software. So to install that, we want sudo apt get install Python. No, we're not doing a Python tutorial. We're just basically using some of the support software that comes up with it. Properties, Python properties. We want Python in there if you haven't already got it installed. I probably have, because it's a Linux box and most Linux boxes do come with it installed. Then we want G++, which is to compile C++ code if there's any needed, and also the make file at the end, or the make program rather. And as you can see, I've already got that installed. Again, you will see a small download and installation process happen after that. Following that, we have sudo add apt repository. So if I concentrate hard, I should be able to spell this correctly, because it's one of those tricky words that always seems to trick me up. PPA, and it's Chris Leah / node.js. So that's that imported. Now what that basically does is allows us to access Chris Leah's secure repository of Node.js for Ubuntu or for Debian-based Linux. Then the next thing we do is we do a sudo apt get update, and then that'll take in a new list of all the available software through the repositories, including the new Node.js stuff. Once it's updated, like it has there, then we can then finally install Node.js, now that it knows all about the package information. And we do that by doing sudo apt-get install Node.js. Okay, so that's Node.js installed. Now, we've got Ruby installed, we've got Node.js installed. We also need something called Ruby Gems. Now, Ruby Gems is a great little repository kind of thing that allows us to download pre-packaged modules of code to help us build various different applications. Now, inside of that repository is where Rails is kept for us. So we need the Ruby Gems to actually go through the process of installing Rails later on. So we're about 2/3 of the way through what we need to do to get this all set up, and things are going well. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go to docs.rubygems.org, and on the top of the page you see a download link. If we go there, we can see that there's a list of all the different versions of Ruby Gems that we can download, and it's probably best if we take the most current version, which is Ruby Gems 1.8.25. It comes in zip or tar gzip if you want, and I tend to use this one because it's easier to do it on Linux. So what we do is we download that. Shouldn't take very long, and then if we just open it, it's got a Ruby Gems folder inside, which it's probably best if we extract that onto the desktop, which I already have done here, as you can see. Once you've extracted that to the desktop, you can just close that and forget about it. And now if we go to the desktop into here, we can see that there's various different bits and bobs, so to speak. And the thing we're interested in is this CI_build script. Now what that does for us is it actually builds up the Ruby Gems and installs it on our system for us. So what we need to do is just navigate to the desktop and Ruby Gems there. And we want to run sudo CI build. And that will go away and build the actual Ruby Gems into the system. Once that's completed, then we should now be able to use the Ruby Gems system. Now what that does is it gives us a new set of commands on the command line to install Ruby modules. And the way that we install Ruby modules is by using the gem command. Now what we do is we go gem install and then the name of the actual gem or module for Ruby that we want to install. And in the case of ours, we obviously want to install Rails. So then, if we click that, then this will go away, download the most recent version of Rails, which is 4.0, and install it on our system. Once that's the case, then we've got access to the Rails system. So I'm not going to click enter there, but you should do on your system. And once that's finished downloading, then you should then have the Rails system available to you, which will be compatible with your Ruby 2.0. Now, almost the last step, but we've got one last thing to do because we want to use a database system in the background. I've picked MySQL for this, but you could very easily use Postgres or some other database system if you wanted. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to show you how we install MySQL onto this system. So the command to do that is sudo apt get install, which you recognize from earlier. We want MySQL server. We want MySQL client. We want lib MySQL client -dev, and we want, of all things, PHP my admin. Now what am I going to use PHP for? The reason why I do that is because PHP my admin is a pretty nice GUI front end to the MySQL database system, so it's a lot easier to just kind of look inside of databases and see that things are actually really happening the way you intend to do that. So it's always best to use a GUI. You may not use PHP my admin. There are other MySQL GUIs around, and feel free to use those. but this one's just, I find it particularly simple to use myself, and of course it's free and open source. So if you haven't thought of what you might use, then feel free to give it a go, see what you think. So once we've done that and we've installed all of that, then you'll get the message at the end that just says the installation's complete. And that's all of our software that we need to install, set up and ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go to the Documents folder. Probably easier if I just do that and then go Documents, and then I'm going to go into Ruby blog. Now in our next tutorial I'm going to show you the basics of how to start and make a very simple blog, but for the time being I'm just going to show you how do we actually test our server to see that the Rails is actually working. The first thing we do is we create a brand new Rails project, and this will get us set up for the next tutorial. Because we've installed Rails using gem, we now have a command called Rails for the command line, and we're going to use the new command and say new my blog. And this will go away to Rails and install a default set of software and scripts that will give us a very basic framework for us to build a blog in the next tutorial. So if I just do that, you can see there it's created a number of files. It's even running a bundle install, so at a later date you may want to specify specific parts of the site that you want installed by default, and with that you can use bundle install features to actually do that. But let's just take a look at some of the list of files that we're actually getting. We have an app folder created, and inside of there we have assets, folders, controllers, helpers, views, assets, again, mailers, models. So there's a few default folders created with a few default files inside. So you can see there's a default application JavaScript, a default CSS file for the application, a default application controller, which we'll be extending in the next tutorial. There are helpers. There are also a default layout for the page, which is, if you've ever used server-side includes, you'll know that you can include a basic header and footer and sidebar to your pages, and this is pretty much where you define that. Other things are models. Ruby on Rails follows the pattern MVC, which is Model View Controller, and what that gives you is the ability to separate functionality out into different places inside your project so they're more easy to manage. So when we talk about using a model, what we're really talking about is using a table in a database and having some business functionality applied to that table when we add or remove or update information inside of that table. A controller is really the thing that orchestrates the whole process of getting a web page and filling it with information. And finally, there are views, and a view is basically what you would consider to be an HTML template. So basically, how do you lay out the information so that when it gets to the browser side, or the user sees it, how will it look? So that's a brief overview of how that works. So our bundle install has gone through. It's installing a lot of the stuff that comes in by default. Not necessarily too important for us to go through that right now, but as you can see inside of here, we should now see a folder, my blog folder, and inside there we've got all these folders and various bits and bobs. Now that's the default install. So how do we test it? The first thing we need to do is we do Rails server, or if you want to do that the short way, you can do Rails S, and then Okay, maybe he's not. Yes, of course. Stupid me. So I'm inside of the blog folder, which is the parent of my blog folder. So I need to go inside of my blog to specify which actual application I'm going to try and run the server on. Now, if I run server, there we go. So, simple mistake to make, but be careful that you're in the right folder. If you do that, and you are careful, then we should be able to now go to the web page, and there you go. Welcome aboard, you're riding Ruby on Rails. Okay, so as it says here on the Get Started page, there are various different features to use with the Rails system. So we're going to be looking at Rails Generate to create your models and controllers. We're going to look at routes and how to manage how the user interacts with the URL system in the address bar. And also we're going to look at how to connect things up in connection with the database. But that's the end of this first tutorial, and hopefully this will give you enough information to get you set up and ready for development in our blog tutorial coming next. Thanks for watching.